So when you open up Mudbox, you're going to have this list of presets, some tutorials, or you can open up a file over here. We're going to jump into using a preset primitive model. They have spheres, they have planes, cubes, things like that. I would prefer that you stay away from some of the things like cars and bulls. The human body's fine, head's fine, but yeah, some of these other ones are just a little odd. So I'm going to go with a sphere to start with, and the sphere is going to appear in the middle of my screen. So to talk about what's going on here, at the bottom of the screen we have all the tools. There's different tabs. There's sculpting tools, painting tools. We're not going to use curve tools in this class, posing tools, and select and move tools. Then we have some options over here for our tools, including stamps, stencils, the curve fall off of the tool, which I'll talk about a little bit later, material presets, so that changes what the material looks like. This doesn't really affect your final outcome, but it kind of does. And lighting presets for how you light your model, as well as bookmarks for your camera whenever you eventually make renders, if that's what you want to do. So on the right hand side we have the layers panel, so this is where we're going to list all of our layers. We have an object list where we're going to see all of our different objects, and we have different filters that we can put on our screen, like ambient occlusion, stuff like that. We're not going to be using these too much in this class, but just be aware that this is here. So the layers panel is going to list our sphere, and then as we make sculpts and paints and changes to it, we're going to have more and more layers in here. There's a paint tab. This is where we'll do all of our painting, and the sculpt tab, this is where we'll do all of our sculpting. So I'm in the sculpt tab right now. Below this we have the tool options. So these are things like my sculpting tool has options like the size of the tool. Right now you can see the circle. It's a pretty good size of the screen. I can make it a little bit smaller. Now you can see how big it is. The strength of that sculpt, whether or not it's mirrored, or inverting the function, or using the stamp image. Let's uncheck use stamp image, stamp spacing, snapped curve, and let's give this a try. So you can see, as I'm just clicking and dragging, it is raising the surface of our model. If I release and click again, it builds up the next layer of the model. So as I'm clicking, it's building up and building up and building up. To navigate this viewport, I'm going to hold down Alt on Windows and drag. I think it's the same on Mac, Alt or Option on Mac. And if I'm just left clicking and dragging, and that rotates. Right clicking and dragging zooms in and out, or you can use the scroll wheel. And then the last one, which this one's a little tricky for people, is you hold down that Alt and you middle click and drag. And middle clicking and dragging will do this effect, this panning. So, or trucking, this is panning. So we have rotational, trucking or zooming in and out. Not really zooming, it is trucking, it's physically moving closer. And then a pan. So as we're sculpting, we can start to change the base form. Again, remember, it's only going to sculpt as high as it can until I release my mouse and then click again. So it's almost like building up on the surface. Okay. If I change the strength here, it's going to be a higher sculpt. If I lower it, it's going to be a lower sculpt. Okay. Invert function is going to make it depress. This can also be achieved by holding down, I believe it's Shift or Control. No, Control. I'm not sure what that is on Mac. It's one of those modifier keys. It's either Control or Shift. Shift smooths the surface. So I'm holding down Shift and I'm just smoothing this out. Then I can build it back up. Hold Control to depress that back down. And you can see how we can start to get some base forms here. If I want to use a stamp, that's really better for high res, but you can see the effect. It's going to give it some texture. Fall off is going to change how the sculpting works. Again, this is going to be for higher res, which I'll show a little bit later. So as we're getting used to these tools, we can see there's other tools down here too. There's smoothing, which does that effect that we were talking about before. Same kind of thing, it smooths out a surface. Relax tries not to smooth the surface, but rather remove some of the sharp points from a surface. Grabbing will grab a particular point on the surface and pull it. It's a little tricky to use. I'll show you how I use it a little bit later. Pinching will try to sharpen up an area. Flatten will flatten it out. Foamy is going to build up a more subtle surface. Spray, repeat, imprint are all used with stamps and stencils and things, so we're not going to use those yet. Wax is another kind of smooth building. Allows you to build up the surface really quickly. Scrape kind of pulls the surface. It's not going to be too noticeable right now because we don't have a very high-res model. Fill is going to fill in depressed areas. I don't know if I have a depressed area, maybe right here. Let's see that kind of coming in. Knife is going to create sharp lines. Smear is going to take features. I'm going to increase the size of my brush and just kind of pull them. It's really good for reforming and reshaping whenever you're closer to the end. Bulge is going to take an area and just kind of balloon it out. Amplify is going to take existing features and make them more intense. So it'll make the peaks higher and the divots smaller or lower. And then we have some remesh, reduce, refine, which we're not going to be using in this class, and the freeze tool, which lets you essentially paint a part of it to now not be affected by other tools. So if I go back to my sculpt tool, notice everything else is getting sculpted, but that blue area is not. So the blue area will try its hardest to stay there. To remove the freeze, we just need to click freeze and we hold down shift to remove the freeze. So those are the very basic sculpting tools. There's also a mask and an erase tool. We're not going to use those in this class. Those are the basic sculpting tools. I'm going to come in to the next video and talk about how to use stamps and how to increase our resolution.